So when I came into the office this morning, when I came in here, as we're sitting, I found that this had fallen off the wall. This sign, bearing the name of the Welsh Rugby Union and the stadium in which they would previously play, the postcode, gone, fallen down. And I couldn't see a more fitting metaphor for what's happened over the last 24 hours, but also over the last few years.
The stadium that has Gatland's gate on it.
Yeah, that's a weird one. That's one they're going to have to address.
So strange.
Because, of course, the question now is, does Warren Gatland have to leave through Gatland's gate?
Yeah, it's such a difficult thing, isn't it, that he is, and probably always will be, Wales's greatest ever coach.
Yeah.
And yet we might be in a position where he doesn't make it to the end of the campaign.
We are recording this about 1 p.m. on Monday, less than 24 hours after Wales's record loss to Australia yesterday. And for all we know, by the time this goes up in the evening, never mind 24 hours later, never mind a few days later, Wales might have hired Mecca Pivac to come in and take over as head coach. We don't know at the minute. However, what we want to do is try and get into what's wrong with Welsh rugby, what's going on, but most importantly, where Wales go next from here. Because I think it is pretty clear at this point that Warren Gatland cannot continue as Welsh coach. I think change has to be made. It has to be made at that level and higher, and it has to be made pretty much immediately.
Yeah, it's such a difficult one. Like, I think I'm almost in denial about like the Gatland era needing to finish, you know, because I always could say this to you kind of jokingly, but it's just like after what happened with Wayne Pivac, where Wales went away for 2-3 years, tried something else, and it went so badly that things haven't recovered in a way since then, you know. And I always said to you, semi-jokingly, semi-not, was just like, well, you know, if in future we've got Warren Gatland and we're shit, then fine.
Yeah.
We just have to accept that. It's just like, oh, well, that's just where Wales are. We just have to accept that we're not very good.
I don't think Wales get better than this under Warren Gatland. My read on the situation would be, I think Wales will probably overperform at the next World Cup if they keep Warren Gatland, right? And there's a lot of people that looked at the last video we made on Gatland a few weeks ago, the big deep dive into his career, into Wales, into everything, and was like, well, you're just like a pro-Gatland stooge, you know? And what I wanted to do was try and look at it objectively and look at both sides, because it's very easy, particularly when talking about the rugby team that you support, to be just entirely emotional, you know? And when your team has lost 9 games in a row, as it was at the time, and they're coming up on equaling their record, which they've since done and broken, it's very easy to go, well, the guy has to go, right? And I want to look at, is there any upside? Is there any opposite side to this?
Sure.
And I think there is, you know, and I think there has been a part of the process, I said, that Gatland teams tend to rely on belief because the way they play is so effort-based and so emotional. And so often it only takes one win for them to turn, you know, a 9-game losing streak into a 10-game winning streak.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's going to happen here, right?
No.
I think, one, if it was going to happen, it would have been the Fiji game. But then you look at the way the players have looked over the last 2 games, and you look at the way they've played, and so many of those Australian tries yesterday came from errors and mistakes.
Yeah.
And then players not being able to get back on their feet or follow up and so on. And the players did not look happy the entire way. And so they shouldn't, because they're losing, you know. But even when they were controlled against Fiji, and even when they looked strong against Australia in the summer, they looked miserable and like they didn't want to be there.
That is the thing.
And I don't think this team turns around sufficiently in a way that they start believing in and buying into the game plan without a freak miracle win. And I don't know where that comes from when you look at their coming results.
Yeah. And that's the difficulty of this, that is it a case of Gatland needs to go because, you know, he's not doing a good job? I don't know. I'm not in the Wales camp. Is it a case of they need a hard reset of some description?
I think they do.
I think that is the most likely scenario. And that kind of breaks my heart to say, because Warren Gatland's a hero of mine, has been growing up, you know, that Warren Gatland's first tenure as Wales coach, his first campaign, that first Six Nations 2008, was where we first started like properly supporting Wales. So, you know, it's like something we've grown up with, and that's why it's something that's so difficult to discuss at times. But on the flip side of that, as you say, the players do not look happy. You know, Warren Gatland, when quizzed by the wonderful Sarah Elgan about this, in a very kind of controlled manner. I think it was a really sensitive way of approaching those questions. He was clearly very nervous about the whole thing, about discussing it. the thing that he brought up was, I'm going to have some difficult conversations. And when Sarah Raglan then asked, what do you mean, who do you mean with? Is that with the powers that be, members of the WOU, with players and so on? And he kind of goes, well, probably my wife, is the first thing. And obviously it's not our place to speculate that, but that says to me that, maybe he wants to go back to New Zealand. Maybe he's feeling the pressure and the stress of this because he's a human being.
Yeah.
This isn't something he doesn't want to do anymore.
Last week, right, that he hadn't really been reading comments and messages and the press and so on, but Bryn, his son, had.
Yeah.
And he said that he got a lot of it passed on by Bryn, who'd been really upset by a lot of it. And that is what ultimately this is going to come down to, right?
Yeah.
Is you look at Warren Gatland in interviews, particular interviews after the game, and there's quite a few Welsh journalists who were there in that press room, brought up, there's two very easy comparisons within Welsh rugby, right? There's Graham Henry, after that loss to Ireland when they got battered and Graham Henry was fired 2 or 3 days later. And then Kevin Bowring when the same thing happened against England in the 90s. Both of them went on to have really strong careers post that, Graham Henry obviously won a World Cup, coached the All Blacks, and Bowring went on to mentor any number of coaches, including some that will come up down the line, from the likes of Steve Borthwick, Toby Booth. Like, you can go through endless numbers of coaches that come through the English system and the Welsh system over the last few years, been mentored by him. However, they hit points in which results weren't coming, and you kind of felt from the atmosphere things weren't going to turn around under them, and they didn't, and they went. And that press room and those interviews with Sarah Elgin, and then the press conference since with Gareth Griffiths as well, like, they were very, very clearly a man who wasn't sure if he wanted to be in the job, right?
Yeah.
And if you're a player in that environment and your coach doesn't seem to know if he wants to be there, who are you going to perform for?
Yeah.
Why would you buy into their game plan?
On the flip side of that, right, the things he said, the really emotive things he said about, I care very deeply about Welsh rugby, 100% believe that.
Yeah.
That's clear for anybody to see. And what he said was, I want this to be whatever the best decision is for Welsh rugby,
yes.
right? Whether that's me staying or me going. And again, I wholeheartedly believe that.
Yeah.
That if he goes, because the WOU think we are better off without you, then he's more than happy with that, he'll pack his bags. On the flip side of that, again, like, if the WOU do believe we're better off with you, then he will sit down and think, right, what do I need to change to turn this around? I don't believe for a second that his heart's in the wrong place, I think there is a lot of stuff he's done that's that's very dodgy, that there's a lot of people he's blamed and thrown under the bus.
That's the thing that gets
he
me
really
as well.
shouldn't have.
Yeah.
And in that respect, his heart is not in the right place. I guess that's a sign of pressure and how at this moment in time he's reacting to that. Because coaches evolve over time, and at the moment, the way he's dealing with that by chucking people under the bus isn't really the healthiest way of going about it.
However, speaking of chucking people under the bus, right? This will be the second time in a month in which Nigel Walker, as head of performance of the WOU, will have thrown a coach under the bus for the teams not performing, when ultimately his job is to get the teams that are named Wales, the men, the women, the under-20s, the other age grade pathways, performing, and that hasn't been happening, right? Because we can talk about Warren Gatland, and we will talk more about Warren Gatland, but ultimately, so much else is wrong within Welsh rugby. And what Nigel Walker's done since he came in is he put a series of sticking plasters on, right? And when you've been bleeding out eternally, right, and suddenly someone comes on and puts a sticker plaster on, the moment they arrive, you think, brilliant, what a great job they've done. Now, I presume, they will continue to do the stitches I need to stop my arm from falling off. But instead, what's happened is Nigel Walker's gone, oh, do you want a second plaster? After that one has already gone mouldy and is covered in blood and soaked through. Like, it's been a series of very small sticking plasters to cover up enormous gaping wounds. And it hasn't been working. Welsh rugby has been broken for a very long time, largely thanks to the fact that we had amateurs, we had geography teachers, and we had people that had, worked in whatever capacity at their local club, had then gone, well, I managed to do this at Bonamine RFC, so therefore I can do it with the Welsh Rugby Union, when actually this is a, £100 million a year business. This is it should always be one of the top 10 rugby teams in the world. At one point over the last 5 years, it has been the number 1 rugby team in the world, right? And
under Warren Gatland, I will add.
You need to be treating them like that, right? And instead, everything has been left to rot, right? The facilities that are being provided to the regions, like doing that video on Leinster's Academy recently, if anyone's going to look at that, it's on the main channel. It's extraordinary how much Leinster's sub-academy facilities are better. I've been around 2 of the regions, like, I've seen their facilities, and, like, Leinster's set, like, not even their second team, their sub-academy has stronger facilities in the regions because they're not being funded properly. So you then get into the regions academies and those aren't being supported pretty much at all. And you look at the only regional academy that has properly produced players who are performing at pro level, at URC and European standard, right? Being the Ospreys, because they brought in Mike Ruddock, who had previously done that job with Leinster and with Ireland in the 20s, so had knowledge of a system outside that. Right? What we've seen is then the Scarlets have produced loads of really talented players, and Cardiff produced loads of really talented players, and they've now stepped up to international level, and they've got no idea how to win games. And this comes back to the whole issue around this Gatland team. I don't think is going to improve because they don't believe in anything, and they clearly aren't buying into. Maybe they are buying into Gatland's game plan, but we're not seeing them able to execute it because they don't have that ability that the players that came from the previous generation, the likes of Dan Bigg, the likes of John Davis, the likes of Sam Warburton, all of them have been winning games regularly at club level and been winning silverware, and a few came through the Dragons, bless them, but even they were much more competitive.
But yeah, that was it. They were drip-fed into a team with, as you say, Jamie Roberts and Justin Tipperick, and players like who are used to winning games, who know how to do it, who play in big teams, whether that's inside Wales or outside of it.
And now you look at this team, right? Can win it. The game against Australia was his 27th game of professional rugby, right? How many of those do you think he's won?
Not that many. God bless him. Cameron, it's not had a bad game for Wales, but I know he's not won a game for Wales.
He's not won a game for Wales. 10 caps.
I don't know, maybe he's won 5 games?
He's won 6 games, right? 3 of those were against other regions, 2 against the Dragons, 1 against the Scarlets.
That says it all.
The Storm was the Sharks, and then Ulster last game before coming out. Rejoining Wales.
And he's such a good player.
He's a brilliant player because those regions aren't being supported, as I say, facility-wise, but also budgetary, right? Yeah. And this comes back to the big issue. You look at that Ospreys team they sent out to Ulster, which had 2 amateur players on the bench because they had to call someone up at short notice because they had a series of injuries. They had a series of there's a union issue that meant they had some players who weren't available. So they were left bringing amateur players in because the squad sizes are so small. You saw Cardiff last season, and couple of seasons ago, stretching to picking academy lads, picking lads from Cardiff Uni. We've seen this across all the regions because all of their squads are about 10 players smaller than the Irish and Scottish and South African. The South African teams are even bigger. Yeah. Minimum 10 players smaller, which means you can't rotate your squads. And the players you do have in there are largely often academy lads because you can't afford to keep your best players. And they leave and they cycle out every few years. And you're left with kind of what remains, right? Yeah. And there's been a lot of people saying, does Wales have the raw talent at the minute? And I think they do. I think those players, at the very least, are good enough to be beating Fiji and Italy at home.
That's it. I think there's the talent
up against the Wallabies.
I don't think there's the nurture.
Yeah, exactly.
Talent, talking about, again, to go back to performance director Nigel Walker, right? So he oversees, as you say, any team just called Wales, right? Yeah. So there have been, I believe, 21 senior Wales international matches this year. And between the 2 teams, they have won 4 games, right? Yeah. All 4 of those were the women. Yeah. And all of those games, other than the Spain qualifier for WXV, I know we're talking about men's rugby, not women's rugby.
But it all counts, it all matters.
Yes. All of those were quite narrow victories, which are victories nonetheless, don't get me wrong. But all of those were games where it's we're quite lucky there. We've come through the other side of that.
2 of them were last-minute winners.
Yeah.
Right? Last-minute win against Australia, last-minute win against Italy. And then, obviously, they beat Spain in the World Cup qualifier. Yeah. Which they'd be expected to win. And Spain were ahead just before, around half-time. Yeah, it wasn't like it was a vintage performance for most
And the Japan game was a lot closer than it probably should have been.
Yeah, yeah. Wales would have been 18 months ago putting Japan to the sword a bit.
Yes.
They have slid so far backwards.
And so for context around this, what's happened with Nigel Walker is somewhere around the timeline of probably just before WXV. Yeah. He personally threatened Wales, the players, the coaches, the staff, everything, that he would withdraw them from the Rugby World Cup and potentially WXV as well if they didn't sign shit contracts.
Within 3 hours.
Within 3 hours.
There was a deadline put on it. If you don't sign within 3 or 4 hours, enough of the squad don't sign, we'll withdraw them and we'll block you from being able to play personally.
Yeah. And when I say shit contracts, I mean, we don't know the wage, but presumably very poor. Obviously, they have to train within the Vale of Glamorgan at all times. There's no flexibility around all of that.
No maternity cover.
No maternity cover. Yeah, they had no flexibility on any of this. No say on this from any of the players. It's yes or no. You either sign these contracts or you're not a professional rugby player anymore. You have no facilities to train in, and you are not playing in the biggest competitions of rugby, which they had worked to qualify for. Yeah. Because they're good enough players. So Nigel Walker led the charge on this. It's also said in the release that Johan Cunningham kind of wasn't helpful around all of this, that he
Becky
kind of
Thomas from the Telegraph.
yes,
mentioning, like,
that he
Thomas
kind
as
of
well.
backed up Nigel Walker's idea. The way I kind of read into that is he saw the time pressure and thought, like, panicked. And the reason why I suspect that is because in past, Johan Cunningham has been so vocal to Nigel Walker and to other members of the WOU of trying to get more out of the contracts they're giving the women. Right?
Yeah.
Get more contracts, get them paid better, get maternity cover and so on. He is so precious, potentially even at times too precious, about protecting the legacy of Welsh women's rugby.
Yeah.
You know, if you watch like her story and stuff that goes
Which
on the
is brilliant.
WOU's YouTube channels, all of that sort of stuff, you can see how deeply he cares and like how much his heart is in the right place. And so, obviously, Johan Cunningham could have and should have done more out of this, right? There's no beating around the bush there. But I suspect he was very heavily, you know, put under pressure by Nigel Walker and Abby Tierney, right?
Well, he was in a situation, right, where they were days out from playing a test match and his players couldn't train because of this contract dispute.
Yeah.
So I understand him being in a situation where he wanted that over. And the moment the contract's on the table that they had, you know, from what we've heard, there was a player or two that were happy to sign those contracts just to get it over and done with. Yeah. And I think he sided with that and decided with, we want this to be over so that physically I can get a team out to train because we're playing a game in 4 days' time. That's how close this ran.
And it's very similar to the situation last year with Warren Gatland and players going on strike. And, you know, there were players on antidepressants. There were all sorts that the
players
squad
got turned down from mortgages and houses because there wasn't enough security in playing international rugby for Wales.
Yeah, exactly. And Warren Gatland took the wrong side, you know, on all of this. And Cunningham, again, like, I understand it's a pressurised scenario, but obviously both of them in those scenarios could have and should have done better. But the main problem here is Nigel Walker. And that, again, with the women there, he's put them under a load of pressure. And then he has, as you said earlier, basically just gotten rid of Johan Cunningham. Johan Cunningham, it says it was by mutual consent that Johan Cunningham left his post as Wales head coach. Which, you know, he's done a job that I'm grateful for, even if as a fan, like, even if the results haven't always been perfect.
I said this before, but I hope that he is ultimately remembered as the guy that brought this stability and confidence and belief into this team for the first time in a very long time.
Yeah.
You know?
And it's so sad that it's ended on a sour note.
Yeah.
And from a fan's perspective, I believe that is down to Nigel Walker mistreating the players.
And generally the lack of funding the W is providing for the women's team.
Correct.
And it comes back to the same issues happening with the regions.
Yes.
Right. And in previous we pointed the finger to, you know, the amount of money that was being spent on jollies and board trips and so on. And I've been led to believe that amount has come down significantly over the last year. However, you still look at this and go, well, the Irish Rugby Union is now earning more money, but previously, when they were on the same amount, Ireland was still spending about 4 times as much, right? And the Scottish Rugby Union, again, about the same, if not slightly less in previous years, yet they spend more money on the two, from what I'm led to believe, the figures I've been, you know, told. They spend more on the 2 Scottish provinces than the Welsh region spend on 4, you know, on double the number of teams.
Yeah.
And it all just stinks, you know, and it becomes ultimately a lack of investment, a lack of funding, a lack of belief. And it's led to the situation now where I do think Warren Gatland's the wrong man for the job, but I think the problems exist far below and far above him.
Yes. I agree on all of the above. You know, that Warren Gatland, probably for the sake of the public and the sake of just the environment, he probably can't stay. No. And that's really sad. I phrase that very deliberately, right? But on top of that, Nigel Walker and Abby Tierney have to go. You know?
I think Tierney has been in the job for a year. I think you can give her the benefit of the doubt and go, okay, change now. Her and Richard Collier-Keys both came into the WE last year and both said that what's really important is people have transparency and accountability, right? And with the women's contract situation and now with this, I feel like we haven't seen this.
Yeah.
Right? And you look at the diehard fans in Wales, the people that are probably watching this video, other than like, you know, South African and Kiwi and English fans who are going like, what the hell is wrong? You know, someone please explain it.
2 Welsh lads have a meltdown on YouTube.
But what we've seen with the diehard Welsh fans, right, is almost universally, or at least 50% of the fan base, but fans of Cardiff and the Ospreys in particular have really more than ever, I think, swung around to like the club side of club versus country. And I know I feel that myself, you know, as an Ospreys fan. Largely because Toby Booth and Matt Sherritt have communicated so well and so clearly and so cleanly and so crisply, and they've been completely transparent. They've told people what's going on. They've been very clear. They've outlined things. They've spoken really well, and they've backed their players up, and they've taken their side. They've not thrown anyone under the bus, other than saying things are difficult. They've acknowledged problems with the WAU. They've acknowledged problems all around them. But there's never been a moment in which I've looked at them like I've looked at Gatland over the last few weeks, consistently blaming other people or throwing things off or having a go at the media in general when people are just doing their jobs. And actually, when Gatland talks about, the media's created this narrative, no, you've created this narrative by losing 11 games in a row.
Yeah, that narrative creates itself.
And I think it was really telling that in the press conference and the 2 interviews after yesterday's game, he didn't bring any of that up because he knows. And this felt like a massive turning point, That Australia game being as devastating as it was coming after the Fiji game. If they just lost, that would have been fine. But conceding 52 points at home to a team that is widely considered the worst Australia team of the professional era, I think almost unarguably, they're definitely turning that around. That's definitely changing.
Of course. This time last year, they were very much considered that.
Yeah.
Let's say that much.
Yeah. And yet, they shouldn't be conceding 52 points, right?
Yeah.
As I say, people can doubt the players, people can doubt the talent. There's definitely talent there to be coming within a score of this Australia team and to be beating Fiji and Italy at home.
Yeah. A really good example of what you're just saying. The biggest day of Toby Booth's career with the Ospreys was the round of 16 game, first time the Ospreys have made a knockout game in Europe for several years, away at Saracens, right? They end up losing the game because Rhys Webb tries something, he throws an intercept pass, Duncan Taylor intercepts it and scores under the sticks, right? And people obviously berated Rhys Webb for this, as happens. And Toby Booth straight away in the press conference after the game says, no, if you're going to beat a team like Saracens away from home, you have to stretch them, you have to try things, you have to take risks. If we just played normal, regular one at rugby today, we would have gone home packing. Saracens would have battered us. If we did something like that and the ball bounced the other way and we went the distance, we might have beaten them. That is what Toby Booth said. He stuck up for Rhys Webb, who made what a lot of people would consider the fatal error, right? Warren Gatland, on the other hand, last week they lost to Fiji, and we discussed this on the previous video about Fiji. He blamed Sam Costello for coming onto the pitch. It's not his choice.
Yeah. But he also, we've seen him, you go back over the post-match interviews, the Australia one was different.
Yes.
But for the 2 tests in Australia, for the game against Italy, and for the game against Ireland, and now the game against Fiji the other week, the first thing he's mentioned in his first answer in the post-match interview on TV, he's mentioned refereeing decisions. Yeah. Right? And to me, a coach, fans are mentioning refereeing decisions, whatever, fine, be angry by all means, right? As the coach, you're in control of most aspects of your team's performance. The 2 things you aren't in control of are the weather and the referee. Yeah. Right? And therefore, you kind of go, okay, we'll prepare the rest, we'll look at the rest, and we want to get in a situation where we can be good, we can be excellent, and be in positions to win the game, regardless of those 2 factors, right? So any coach who comes in and complains about the referee, and to a level, you can do things to get on the right side of the referee, you can target particular referees, but going we're screwed by decisions. 5 out of the last, 6 or 7 games says everything about his lack of control and belief and you should be getting into situations where you don't need that. You don't need the referee.
And in 2019, when we were winning games, he never did that.
Yeah.
It was shock horror.
Yeah.
When Pivac first came in, Wales lost to Italy, and he starts berating Joy Neville as an inexperienced TMO, who was refereed the Rugby World Cup final, by the way. And at that point, that was the point where I was like, I'm sick of Pivac. And now Warren Gatland's doing it every single game. It's like, okay, prepare your team better. Yeah. So you're far enough ahead that one refereeing decision isn't going to, blow you over completely. And that's kind of the annoying thing, because for so many of these games this year, I've, again, as a Wales fan, looked at it and gone, it's not as bad as people think. Yeah. We are underperforming, obviously, but we're underperforming by 10% or so, and people are making out as 50%. And then yesterday happened. The Wales-Australia game happened. It was the moment Len Ikitau scored that try, right? Where that was, if you concede a try like that at second team level or whatever, at your club, you're they're taking a piss out of us now, lads. Yeah. That's what you're saying under the sticks. We cannot concede a try like that again. Where they hit Ikitau in the boot. He looks outside him, sees nobody, starts laughing, and takes Cam Winnett on the outside and scores. He dummies to no one, right? And still scores on the outside. That is the point where it's okay, we are not surviving this level anymore. Yeah. And then obviously the Tom Wright try afterwards was so easy.
Yeah. And I think this comes back to the fact that what Wales are fundamentally lacking is belief and fire, you know? And I think, again, people have raised questions about these players, and I don't buy into any of that, because I do think this is a group of players, and you watch them at club level, and they give everything every single week, right? And I believe they tried, you know, they were really going for that every game there. You know, players like Dewi Lake, phenomenal, you know, Cam Winnett's been brilliant, and obviously gets stood at Bakertown, but like, it's such a harsh reflection of how his year's gone, you know?
It is, yeah. And also that's such a difficult position to play in when your team is having results like that,
Yeah,
you know, at fullback,
exactly.
and he's been brilliant all year.
And yet, you kind of look at those, and there is that kind of, there's no lack of effort, but there is a total lack of belief and confidence. And that is evident in everything they do, in every moment of every game. None of the players look happy on the pitch.
So it's sad to watch more than anything, isn't it?
Yeah.
And that was how yesterday's game felt. You know, like Tom Wright running that try in. It's not that I was gutted. It's not that it was like, oh, my team's lost. It's just like, no, this is just sad. It's a sad situation to be in. Everyone looks like they don't want to be there. All the fans have left. You know, Warren Gatland looks like he doesn't want to be there. You know, Dewi Lake was on the verge of tears in the post-match interview afterwards because he cares so deeply about playing for Wales.
And I think what this Welsh team needs more than anything is a coach who will bring them belief and togetherness and build a spirit.
Yeah.
Right? And I don't think Gatland's going to do that. I think you can tell that by the fact he looks like he's visually checked out. And yeah, I think he's got to go. I think there's a good chance he's gone before the South Africa game. I think there's a chance he doesn't coach that game. I think there's probably the strongest chance is we get a press release saying Gatland will leave after that game.
Yeah.
You know, and this will be his last game.
Get a Dean Ryan situation.
Yeah,
where it's just like,
yeah.
look, he's just not going to turn up on Saturday, lads.
Yeah.
I can't tell you why, but good luck.
He's absent.
Yeah.
Just missing. Which raises the question, right? If we want to look at where does Wales go from here?
This conversation is so sad, isn't it?
Yeah, but where does Wales go from here? Right, I've seen some people saying like, "Is this it? This is going to be it for a decade." You know, is this Wales done as a major rugby nation forever? I don't think it's that bad. I don't think it's that situation. I think there's enough people that care deeply. I think there's enough talent in this pool.
Yeah.
I think there's enough, you know, investment.
It's easy to overreact because international rugby is so competitive.
Yeah.
You know, there's so many good teams that somebody has to be the team that's underperforming.
Yeah.
At the moment, it's our turn as Wales fans.
And like, you know, Wales have had periods in the past where they've underperformed under Gatland, and yet they played in eras where Fiji weren't as strong, where Italy weren't as strong, where Scotland weren't as strong. And now, you know, what could have been 3 games where you scraped by and 7 losses becomes, well, it's about to be 12 losses.
Yeah.
You know? And that is a big part of the issue.
Imagine they beat South Africa when you tell words it. Anyway.
It would be an extremely Gatland thing to do. You know, of old Gatland to suddenly turn it around. But I think they need to be rebuilt from the ground up. In that way, you know, there's a chance they give it to Rob Howley or someone as a caretaker coach. I don't think that'll do anything. I think Howley is basically Gatland light.
I agree. He would just say all the same stuff.
Yeah.
To the squad.
So it then becomes, right, who do you bring in as replacements? And I know who I would bring in, who I'd look to.
I think I know who that is, but we'll get to that.
Yeah. But to quickly run through kind of contenders, right, you have the name that keeps coming up, I think, is Dave Rennie. People have brought up Dave Rennie quite a lot, who's currently coaching in Japan. So is an option. You also have, also in Japan, you know, the likes of Ian Foster is a possibility as someone that's coached at this level.
Yeah. Robbie Deans.
Robbie Deans. I think there's a bunch of people who you could bring in. You know, Michael Check has come up quite a lot. He's only on a 1-year deal at Leicester.
I feel weird about that.
So there's every chance you could get him in for after the domestic season, so he comes in for the summer onwards. I don't know about that. But I also, as I said, I don't think what Wales need is a tactician. I don't think they need a Joe Schmidt figure. What I think they need is someone to build an atmosphere and a belief and get the nation believing in this team again, you know? If everything had been like that Scotland game in the Six Nations where they came back and they showed real fighting spirit, that would be fine. I think people would be okay with it.
Yeah.
Instead of the fact that they are just falling over and looking like they can't get back up.
Yeah. As you say, it's the emotion behind it rather than necessarily the rugby that's being played. One name that people keep throwing out there is Ronan O'Gara. And like, where are they going to get the money to pay him first and foremost? Secondly, you would have to pay that guy a lot to swallow his pride and coach
Wales.
Like his biggest rivals as a player.
Because like at least the England job will pay enough that you can probably swallow it for a bit for that.
Yeah.
But like it is the job I can imagine Ronan O'Gara taking least.
Yes, and he's more than happy where he is, you know, La Rochelle. And yeah, like if you think of like all of his rivals on the pitch that aren't called Johnny Sexton.
Yeah.
You think of like Stephen Jones, you think of Mike Phillips, like you think of all of these like legendary Welsh players who he just like really didn't get on with. So that's never going to happen.
No.
But, yeah.
The name I would throw in,
Yeah.
the guy I would go to is, I recognise there's a bias, as I mentioned, as an Ospreys fan, but Toby Booth.
I thought you were going to say Kingsley Jones with your Canada shirt on.
Yeah, Kingsley. We could bring in Kingsley Jones to make things even worse.
That is the one thing, like Welsh fans, take a breath, it could be worse.
Yeah, it could be Canada. I would bring in Toby Booth because the way this Welsh team makes me feel watching them is the same way I felt watching the Ospreys in 2019 and early 2020 when they were just awful and they looked like they didn't care, they looked hopeless, and it felt miserable to watch them, and they were just like lacking structure and most of all lacking identity. And then Booth comes in, and within 3 weeks they beat Edinburgh away and they're playing for clear identity and they look like they care and they're playing for each other, and that builds into what this team's become, right? Which is a massively outperforming everything they should have been doing. And they've announced Booth is leaving at the end of the season.
Yeah.
Mark Jones will take over as head coach there, who I think is perhaps the strongest coach Wales has produced, like
as a
actual Welsh
technical coach. Yeah.
In a very long time. And Booth does not, as far as we know, as far as public knowledge goes, have another job lined up afterwards. He said he's looked at jobs in other sports as well, potentially, other things, or, academia, he's lectured and so on as well. I think he is the perfect fit in terms of how he rebuilt that Ospreys team. Is exactly the same job Wales needs doing.
That's the thing, because there are such parallels you can draw on the kind of effort-based personality that the Ospreys have with how Gatland's good Wales has been, in past. And look, Toby Booth talks a lot about finding a way.
Yeah.
And I think he has a really good sense of perspective on what teams should be able to achieve. And I think he would have that with Wales, for sure.
Yeah.
My kind of main question is whether he'd want to do that, I certainly don't
think that's the thing, isn't it?
think he would want to do it for more than a year. He'd maybe do it to try and rebuild that bridge that's kind of burned down and get Wales believing themselves again, and then hand the job over to somebody else. Because, I don't know, he's not done international rugby jobs before.
No.
I don't know if he likes the idea
Saxons.
other than Anglo-Saxons. But I don't know if he likes the idea of all of the horrific pressure and abuse that comes with it. Whereas in club rugby, it's a little bit more personal. It's a bit more kind of his speed, what you'd think. But again, he's not been offered international jobs before, as far as I know. So that's probably the reason why he's not done it, because he's more than a good enough coach.
The other thing is, though, and there is something about Toby Booth as a personality, and as a coach, and as the way he speaks to the media, speaks to fans, speaks to supporters. I should say, the way he conducts himself, that has done a brilliant job in a way I've never quite felt with another coach at any other club, of negating that completely.
Yeah.
And any time there's been horrible losses or bad moments or anything, he has generally come out and given an interview that's exactly what I, as a supporter, wanted to hear.
Yes.
Almost every time, to the point in which I believe in him to turn it around.
Not covering his own arse one bit.
Yeah.
Not going, oh yeah, well there were positives of this, that and the other. He will instead open with, well, I can sense that you're hurting.
Yeah.
I can sense you're upset with our performance. We need to do better. That's fine.
Yeah.
Anyway, here are the positives. Here are the things we need to address. Here is our overall look. We will find a way.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't know any Ospreys fans who at any point in his tenure have been angry with him or directed anything to him, even when things have been going badly. And there have been moments which things haven't been working. At the start of the season the other year where they lost successive games on the bounce, and there've been odd, huge losses. But this year as well. But no one has directed anything back at him, because he comes out and he's transparent and he is clear. And Matt Sherritt's done exactly the same thing at Cardiff, right? Cardiff lost 11 games and losing bonus points last year, which feeds back into some of this Welsh team being Cardiff players. They're in that situation where they're used to losing games narrowly.
Yeah, being in the fight and not winning. Yeah.
And yet Matt Sherritt has been completely transparent about what he wants to do with this team, who he wants them to be, how he wants to develop them, how he's looking at these as personalities and as individuals. And that is leading to people buying in and believing in him. And the amount of times there's been an issue come up and Sherritt has come out and spoken about it, and he's spoken so well and so clearly and so concisely and got a message across in the way that supporters have bought into, is outstanding. And I think Sherritt is the other guy who I think he's much less experienced than Booth, and he's also got a longer term contract with Cardiff, so it's a different situation. But I think if not them, what Wales needs is someone that knows Welsh rugby and knows the situation, and can come in, but can express the same frustrations that fans are feeling, express that same sentiment, but have a clear plan and a vision. And you want to look at the coach and go, okay, I trust them to turn it around, right? And no one is getting that from Gatland's interviews. You're going, oh, well, he's blaming other people, he's complaining about things, and he's going, do I really want to be here?
It screams
he
desperation.
said to himself, he doesn't know if he wants to be here anymore.
Yeah.
And that is not a guy I, as a player or as a fan, as a supporter, would want to be following.
The other elephant in the room with Toby Booth is, of course, Wales are in such a transitional phase at the moment. You know, they've had Justin Tipuric's retired, Dan Biggar's retired, Alan Wynne-Jones is retired, Ken Owens retired, George North retired. There's an endless list of Welsh players who are Welsh legends who lived through that golden era of Gatland, of getting to the World Cup semi-final, could have made a final, could have won a World Cup, right?
Yeah.
But didn't. But those players all retiring. The elephant in the room with Toby Booth is he has such a good track record of bringing through youngsters, you know, at various clubs, and particularly most recently with the Ospreys. You look at the reason why the Ospreys have been so competitive when they have been at their best is because of players that he's developed personally, who have come through the Ospreys Academy. You look at Dewi Lake himself. The reason why he's the player himself is because he looked at Dewi Lake when what does he need? He needs advice on his throwing because his carrying is more than good enough. He brought in a kicking coach to help with Dewi Lake's
mentality
throwing.
and
as an individual skill where it's completely isolated. Got him into that stage now, and now he's a pretty good thrower, right? You look at players like Morgan Morris, players like Dan Edwards, right? Jack Morgan, players who are really, really punching above their weight at regional level. And again, it's very different at international level, looking at regional level players and who aren't yet experienced at international level and going, how do we, transition that? But would he be the best at doing that of all the options who are available? Because it's what Wales need.
Yeah, I think he fits the job best. He's the most available, because he's in the country, he won't need to move, and he is on the verge of leaving another job anyway, which will line up with the campaign after the Six Nations. Possibly you put a caretaker in the place there. Possibly you just bring him in for the Six Nations and have him go back to the Ospreys for a few weeks, as a kind of in and out, while he's there.
Proper football manager shit, I like it.
Yeah. But I think that's possible. The Ospreys have said, Booth said previously that if another job came up that wanted him to start more immediately, he believes the Ospreys would be cooperative in allowing him to kind of, work that out.
They have a contingency plan in place, with Tipuric moving up to defence coach,
Yeah, so I think that's very possible. Again, I don't think what Wales need right now is a technician. I think they need someone to install that belief because it has never felt bleaker, Welsh rugby.
Yeah.
I wasn't around in the 90s. I was very, very small in the 90s. I was about that big in the 90s. So I can't compare directly, but this is about to be, providing they don't, by some miracle, be the best Springbok team of all time. The first time since 1937, Wales have lost every game in international, every international game in a calendar year.
It's horrible because I wish this team's so much better than that.
Yeah,
and I
think they can be.
I believe this team is better than that.
Yeah.
I suppose the note to end on is at the end of Dewi Lake's interview yesterday, where he said, "I believe this group of players can go somewhere," and then he pauses, he gets choked up, and he goes, "And we will."
Yeah.
And then he leaves. And I thought it was really powerful. And he's a really good captain. And he spoke very well. And when things are going against you, not everybody speaks like that. But
Absolutely. And I think we've seen enough from these players that there are the people and the personnel in there. The World Cup, you look at that. And you look at individual performances here. That they can be much better than this.
Yeah.
They can be much better
nurture.
than this. Yeah. And they deserve better from above, from below, from all levels. In terms of where Wales go next from here, I think they find a new coach. I think they look to reinstall belief. And I think they re-examine the academy pathways. They re-examine the relationship with the women's team, because that is enormous as well alongside this. And they start to fund the regions properly, They ask themselves, does Nigel Walker or Abby Tiernan or even Gatland or whoever's salary having an extra 20 grand on it, is that worth more to them than keeping hold of, Ryan Comber at the Scarlets, Matt Provorro at the Ospreys, Steph Hughes at the Dragons, Alid Summerhill, whoever at the...
And just
Will Hollow at Cardiff.
Keeping fans of Welsh rugby engaged.
Yeah.
Because you can't take that for granted if
Which
everybody's losing and everybody's having a miserable time.
That comes back to why I think we have to keep 3 regions as well. Because I think you've got to keep fans engaged. You can't afford to lose a quarter of the fan base,
Yeah.
And I've said this before, that if anything, the best thing for Welsh rugby, if it was financially possible at all, would be to add a 5th region and kind of try and big up the Welsh Shield and kind of build that up into being like more of an event. So you've got 8 derbies a year for each club, plus the internationals. You kind of build out a calendar on that. But yeah, we're getting into whole other territory.
We are.
The point is, right, change needs to be made. And I tweeted this, I put this on Blue Sky, whatever, but Gatland's kept saying it's all about lessons and we're learning lessons and whatever. It's not the time for lessons, it's time for change. And that needs to be made sooner rather than later. And it might have been, as I said, Mecha might be in by now, but hey, we'll find out.
Yeah.
Though the Dragon's unhappy.
Commence the Kingsley Jones era.